As a courtesy, members of the public may participate remotely in this meeting. Please refer to the meeting agenda for information about how to provide public comments, either in person here in the room or via Zoom teleconference. Any person may address the commission on any item listed on the agenda. Persons wishing to speak on items listed on the agenda will be heard when called by staff. You're welcome to speak for up to 3 minutes. Public comments from remote participants on Zoom will be audio only. This means members of the public wishing to address the commission will be allowed to speak live. However, their video will not be shown and screen sharing will not be an option. Finally, the city cannot guarantee that the public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and the option of the public to participate remotely is only a courtesy if technical difficulties arise for participants using the teleconferencing Zoom option. The meeting will continue unless required otherwise by the Brown Act. We appreciate your patience while we get used to this new audiovisual system that enables us to offer remote participation. Probably change that. I would like to do roll call. Vice Chair Radnich.
Present.
Commissioner Heising.
Present.
Commissioner Mason.
Present.
Chair Labange present, and Commissioner Sturm is noted absence, excused absence, excuse me. Can I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. Motion is adopted. Public comments. Do we have any public comments for anything that's not on tonight's agenda? Anyone?
Seeing no speakers in the room and no speakers with raised hands, no raised hands on Zoom. So
All right.
no public speakers at this time.
Okay, for the consent calendar, we have draft meeting notes. Does anyone wish to remove or amend anything on the consent calendar? Otherwise, I would ask for a roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wait, don't we have to make a motion?
Oh. Can I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar? Excuse me.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The consent calendar has been adopted. Thank you. New public hearing. We have 2 things for new public hearing, so I'll turn it over to staff for our first one, tree ordinance update. All you.
Thank you and good evening, commissioners. Tonight's meeting marks the first review of the draft tree protection ordinance, which has been in some time coming. Thank you for your participation in the past. I would like to note that our consultant Heather Coleman is not present with us here tonight, but she is available on Zoom should we need to call on her. And she's very much still assisting with the ordinance update, for which we are very grateful. Heather will continue with us through the entire approval process, but I will be presenting at meetings going forward. Interesting. You're probably familiar with this graphic by now. This presents our timeline for the tree protection ordinance update. We are now in the final arrow marked fall for hearings and adoptions of the ordinance. The last time this body reviewed the ordinance update was in August. This was during a joint meeting with the City Council, and this was more of a policy discussion. The actual ordinance was not before us, there was no language, but we were talking about what the content of the ordinance should include. And we were able to receive your comments as well as the City Council's and take those into account as we developed this draft ordinance. This presentation tonight will look very similar to August's presentation. It has the same graphics and the same layout, the same numbers for each of the themes and topics. The main themes, again, will be protected trees, replacement trees, fire, and procedures. And on each slide, as we go through each topic, there will be on the left the recommendation. This is now what's listed in the draft protection ordinance, and alternatives on the right. At this time, we've eliminated alternatives for which we heard no support and only carried forward those which we heard some voices express support for. Of course, what made it into the ordinance is what we heard the most support for. Looking first at our protected trees theme, there are 3 topics here: size and species, development plans, and street trees. The main theme of this area is to continue to emphasize protection of native species and large mature trees while refining species lists to reflect flammability concerns. So I will jump right in. And unlike August, I am going to go through each item that is in the staff report. So number one, protected trees, size and species criteria. What we've included in the draft TPO are the three bullets on the left. On undeveloped properties, we would exempt the excluded species list. These are primarily flammable and invasive species. And we would raise the protected size from 6 to 12 inches for all species except for native and riparian. These would stay at 6 inches. On developed properties, we would add cork oaks to the protected species list. We did also hear support for other alternatives on undeveloped properties, such as raising the protected size to 12 inches for all species, including native and riparian, and the alternative to protect only native and riparian species. I'm going to go through all of these, but if anyone has a clarifying question, please stop me. We can talk about it then. Yes?
Oh, well, I don't know if you read that, but they were claiming the cork oak isn't native, and then you're also talking about just protecting native trees. Are we adding an addendum to native trees and ...
Yes, and I do address the comments at a later time in the presentation, but for the cork oaks, these would be added under the native heading. It's not a strictly defined must be native in the area. The reason for the addition, which was originally suggested by one of our stakeholders, is in order to expand the number of species available, especially as we're proposing a limitation on replacement trees to the list that we provide. And so, we've noted, we heard also from the DRC that many applicants choose one or two of the proposed or protected species to replant, and they'd like to see a wider list, list of options. And in addition, in talking to the city landscape consultant, as we all understand, the climate is changing. We are becoming hotter and drier, generally speaking. And so we want to expand the list of species to take that into account to those that are more suited for warmer and drier conditions, such as the cork oak.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Number two of protected trees, this is trees on development plans. In the draft TPO, we would remove blanket protection for trees shown on development plans and provide only specified trees, which would be listed in conditions of approval. I should clarify that the current ordinance does not in fact say that all trees shown on development plans must be protected, rather that they can be protected. And this is more of a change to our internal processes. Most recently, a lot of staff had interpreted that to mean any tree shown. This would be changed, and we would use our discretion in the staff report and with the bodies of approving development plans to decide which trees were most important for screening, privacy, and other things. They would be specifically named and called out in the conditions, and other trees would be left to normal protection. Either they were a protected species or perhaps they were not protected at all, instead of every tree on every approved plan automatically becoming protected. So that's what the goal of this change would be. And so that's why we've removed what was previously discussed on the right, which is we were talking about we're talking about removing protection for all flammable trees. And we've taken that out because some flammable trees do still offer important visual screening protections and privacy protections. So staff would exercise discretion in these cases on past approvals where conditions did not call out specific trees. And in some cases, ensure that trees remained in place so that those screening issues stayed addressed.
Just a question on that. That's past approvals that have already been built, right?
Already been approved.
Approved.
So starting as part of this process, because it was an internal process, the planning department, have updated our process now to call out in our conditions which trees should be protected. That's taken place. But prior to that, we did not have that process. And so anything that comes in, if someone calls us and their approval happened 5 years ago or 2 years ago, even if they haven't actually constructed it, they wouldn't have any specific trees listed. And so we would use our discretion to decide which trees. And it would be a matter of looking at the minutes, at the discussion, looking at the surrounding properties, and deciding which trees offered the importance of privacy screening, visual screening, et cetera.
Okay, and just, maybe you said that, but so that I don't think of this wrong, my concern was, or I thought we were trying to not have this situation where a tree is removed because it's not the right species and that tree was supposed to be screening. So if it's not the right species and we don't want it there, but we want screening, but it's already approved, is there a mechanism to say, well, you just have to, don't put a eucalyptus or do something that makes what we consider the right move, which is put the right tree, keep the screening or create the screening, but don't put a flammable tree there.
If we're talking about something that's already been approved and it's buttoned up, there's no mechanism to change what would go in. If the person came in after their approval and said, I've changed my mind, I want to take a tree out, then we would use our discretion to say, well, it's flammable, which isn't great, but it's very important in privacy screening, so it is protected and you would need to replace it.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just hoping there'd be the ones that we realize aren't a good one to have there that aren't built, but there's no check on that unless they come in asking for a change. Okay.
As with all planning regulations, it's slow to implement. As things come up, we apply them.
But there's not, like in construction, they might be approved, but they still need CDs, so you could catch them on the CDs. But in this case, there's no second catch.
Once the planning entitlements are approved, we have no further
Right,
recourse
there's
to make
okay.
changes.
Okay. It is what it is, then. Thank you.
You're welcome. Number 3, this pertains to street trees. In the draft TPO, we have 2 topics here, city-maintained and privately maintained trees. For city-maintained trees, we included the requirement that the city does pull a permit, but there would be no fee. There would be no exchange of monies between departments. When replacement trees are planted, they would primarily be planted in the same location if possible, and if not, they would be planted in the same right-of-way along basically as close as possible. We would want to ensure that any tree that came out is not going back in the same place only to cause similar damages if that were the reason for its removal. On privately maintained trees, we would waive the application fee if the city is mandating the work, such as a sidewalk repair. And if an arborist report states that the tree would likely die if placed in the same location. So again, it would be placed in the same location if possible, and if not, could be moved to a nearby location. We did also hear support, oh, sorry, was that a question?
Through the chair, yeah, just a quick question on that. So that second bullet, just I'm reading this verbatim. The tree shall be planted in the same location as the removed tree if possible, which you just said, but allow replacement trees to be planted on any public street or right-of-way if the planting in the same location is not possible. But what you just said was it would be planted as close as possible, but it doesn't say that in the bullet, in the language in the bullets. So that's my question, and when we get to deliberation, I'm going to make a proposal that we put that specific language in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, apologies if I misrepresented that. So for alternatives that we did hear support for, on city-maintained trees, we heard support to exempt city-owned and maintained trees from tree permits as a whole, but have the planning director review. And we also heard support to waive the fees but require mitigation plantings and log the decision for removal to prevent repetition. I believe this was for repetition of the location. For privately maintained trees, we heard support for not requiring a permit if the city has mandated removal, and the city in this case would provide a letter to the property owner in case of challenges so that they could furnish that upon request. Next up, we are going to talk about replacement trees. The goal here is to refine replacement planting requirements to allow for appropriate spacing and foster healthy tree growth. feasibly fit trees on site, and be fair and consistent. We'll look at number and size, reductions to requirements, species, and location and fees. First off, with number and size, we heard strong support for adopting a 1-to-1 replacement ratio and requiring the replacement trees to be a minimum of 15-gallon in size, but any higher size also to be allowed. Alternatives to this would be to carry the current replacement ratio forward or reduce it slightly. In this case, we would require the planting of at least one tree for each removed tree, but then based on the additional trees required, those could be either planted or paid as in lieu fees. So the current ratio is 1 tree per 3 inches of diameter. This could also be altered to be 1 tree per 6 inches. Looking next at reductions to requirements. This is a little complex, but looking at what's proposed in the draft TPO, the proposal is to allow in lieu fees instead of planting trees if canopy cover exceeds certain numbers. So if it exceeds 75% on the property site, in lieu fees would be allowed for up to half of the tree replacement number. And if the canopy cover exceeds 90%, in lieu fees would be allowed for all of the required trees. And again, this is allowed, not required. An arborist report's recommendation that additional trees wouldn't foster healthy growth would also allow someone to pay in lieu fees instead of planting. And if additional trees would not comply with defensible space requirements. And apologies for a lot of the abbreviations here. I was trying to make everything fit. So DS is defensible space. The goal here is to make sure that trees are not crowding the structures or becoming a continuous wall of greenery. They are meant to be in kind of separate blobs so that fire cannot spread from one to the other. So all of those reasons would allow someone to pay in lieu fees instead of planting. And then the additional proposal is to remove fees and replanting if there is no room to replant on the property except in Zone 0, and the remainder of the property is 90% under canopy coverage. We have 2 alternatives proposed here. One is that for Category 2 tree permits, which are with development, requiring in lieu fees if the only replacement location is in Zone 0. Again, the difference here is requiring versus allowing. And then having an arborist decide if the only place to plant is Zone 0, if it impacts the defensible space, et cetera, instead of the planning director. Moving on to species of replacement trees. We have 3 recommendations that were included in the draft TPO. The first is to require native and riparian species to be replaced with trees of the same species group. The change here is that currently if you take out a coast live oak, you need to replant a coast live oak, which is a native species. Going forward, the suggestion would allow any native tree species to be planted instead of just a coast live oak. So a little more flexibility, but staying within that same group. The second proposal is if a removed tree was not native or riparian, we would limit the replacement species to the same size group on the recommended tree list. And I did want to mention that this recommended tree list, it's included in the definitions of the ordinance. The list originated with the Trees for Lafayette document, which is the city's master tree plan, but was heavily modified by our current city landscape consultant based on current research, climate change, appropriate species. And so it's a long list. It allows for a lot more species diversity, and it's grouped by size. So the idea is that if a tree came out that was not native or riparian, you could look at the replacement list, find the appropriate size comparison, and choose any tree from that size group on that recommended list. The final recommendation here is to exclude any highly flammable species as replacement trees. And again, this is, I apologize, actually highly flammable has been shifted to excluded species, which is defined again in the ordinance. And so that would be species that we do not allow to be planted. As an alternative, we heard support to remove all restrictions on replacement tree species for both Category 1 and 2 permits, and allow any species to serve as a replacement tree.
Can I ask one question? Before the alternatives, when you were saying replace of similar size, I'm confusing that because I thought earlier we were not, as long as over 15 gallons.
I apologize, not the size of the root ball, which is what 15 gallon generally refers to, or a 24-inch box, not the size of the tree, which kind of defines its age when it's planted, but rather on the recommended tree species list, the size groupings are by size of tree when fully grown.
Okay.
And so it's, smaller trees like redbud, coast live oak, the largest tree, so it's trying to discuss what size the tree will represent when fully grown and making sure that we're not replacing a coast live oak with a redbud
Okay.
over and over again,
Thank you.
of course. And so number 7, location and in lieu fees. The suggestions here are to continue to require replacement trees to be planted on the same lot or site. This was discussed as an option to not require this, but the general opinion was to keep it. And then to create objective criteria for when applicants must or may choose to pay in lieu fees. And we did discuss this in number 5 earlier. We did not receive any comments or support for other alternatives. Moving on to the theme of fire. Here we want to make it easier for property owners to remove trees for defensible space purposes and align tree regulations with vegetation management strategies for defensible space zones. We also want to make it easier to remove dead trees. So our topics here are fire risk and vegetation management and dead trees. For fire risk and vegetation management, we have 3 suggestions. First, to allow tree removal in Zone 0, which again is the first 5 feet around a building or an attached structure, without a permit or staff review. This would allow the property owner to simply effect the removal, and we would trust that they were doing it correctly unless someone called and had us verify after the fact. Second, to allow branches and multi-trunk trees to be pruned back to 10 feet from existing buildings and structures, regardless of health impacts. Currently, and this is carried forward in the draft ordinance now, pruning constitutes the removal of no more than 25% of the general volume of the branches and the roots. Any further removal is constituted, it requires a tree permit, even if the tree is still remaining and does have some volume left. So this bullet would allow additional pruning beyond that number, that percentage, if that volume were within the 10-foot distance from a building or structure. The 10 feet, the reason it's bigger than the 5-foot Zone 0, that comes from a suggestion from the people that we spoke to with the Cal Extension groups. We spoke to 3 different experts, and that number is scientifically supported. That's kind of where fire makes its best leap, I think. So 10 feet is meant to protect buildings and structures. A single trunk tree with, that's healthy, that's within the 5 to 10 feet area. We're not talking about allowing someone to take that out completely. That's why we use the word pruning. So the smaller branches, some limbs that are closer to the building, those can be pruned back. The full-on removal is only allowed within that 5 feet Zone 0. And third, we recommend requiring a letter from Contra Costa County Fire Protection District for fuel breaks. This is currently part of the ordinance, but we've clarified some language here. Specifically that the letter would need to identify the specific trees to be removed that would be exempt from permitting, and that the city would work with the district to try to have all fuel breaks be shaded if at all possible. A shaded fuel break means that the larger trees are limbed up A lot more air is created, there's less bushiness, but trees remain, whereas a full-on fuel break means all vegetation is removed. So it can be very different feeling. Our alternative here is to allow tree removal without a permit with a letter from an insurance provider. And I apologize, I lacked some clarity here from the commenter who suggested this. It was not clear to us if this was meant to apply in Zone 0 only or throughout the property. But the idea was to let the insurance provider provide a letter and then allow tree removals as suggested by the insurance provider without a permit.
We talked about that at our last meeting pretty extensively, so I'm good with that staying in the alternative section.
For dead or dying trees, the general consensus at the last meeting was to focus only on dead trees. In this case, what was included in the draft ordinance is that no permit would be required to remove a dead tree with a letter from an arborist that the tree is dead and died of natural causes. The goal here is to ensure that property owners are not either neglecting or purposefully killing trees that they don't want to have to remove with a permit. Alternatives include allowing planning staff instead of an arborist to verify that a tree is dead, to not require a permit or fee to remove dying trees in very poor conditions per ISA guidelines. An arborist report would be required here, and to allow removal of dead trees with no permit, arborist report, or staff review. Moving on to our last theme, which is procedures. Here we're trying to establish clear and objective standards, minimize the number of discretionary decisions, and deter illegal tree removal. This includes topics on tree removal for safety, penalties for violation, and additional issues. Our first topic, tree removal for safety, originated from a comment from the city attorney who suggested changes to some language. However, in their discussion, your discussion in the August meeting, both city council and planning commissioners returned comments that they did not support the changes, so no changes are proposed to this section. The language would continue as it currently stands. And just for clarity, let me go ahead and read that one moment. So this has been moved to Section 61705, exemptions to permit requirements. It sits under the determination by director section. And the 5 items listed under it are items that were already listed in our current ordinance. The item in question here, number 5, says, so the lead-in is the director may grant an exception in any of the following circumstances. Number 5, when the city must remove a protected tree to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. The attorney's suggestion was to include language regarding expanding that to public agencies and utilities, and that language change was not carried forward or supported, and so no change is proposed. Penalties for violation. This is a little complex and new. So I will clarify first that the table on the right in green is actually part of the recommended section on the left. There just wasn't room. So included in the ordinance is suggested to create fines for illegal tree removal based on tree diameter. Currently, there are no fines for removal. Instead, replacement tree numbers are much higher than for normal removal. So we would remove the requirement for additional replacement trees, and instead the normal ratio would apply, but we would add fees for illegal removal. So the penalty would be charged for each removed tree, and then that would be summed, and the amount charged per tree would be determined by what violation it was. So if someone didn't know about our ordinance and went out and removed 2 trees, that would be a first violation, and each tree would be charged according to its size, and that would be added. If then, knowing that we had an ordinance and ignoring it, they went out and removed a 3rd tree separately, that would be a second violation. And you can see here in the table that those numbers are going up quite a bit. And so this would continue. The table only goes to second violation, but any additional violations would double the amount each time something like this happened. And this would be true only for the same owner on the same property. It becomes very complex if we're tracking ownership across different properties, and of course, we don't want to charge a new owner on the same property. It's a different situation. So the proposal, as I mentioned, would eliminate this replacement ratio for illegal removal and instead rely just on the fees. And it would also treat the failure to plant replacement trees as a violation. So this would put a little more teeth into people not planting their replacement trees. Currently, we do not have a mechanism for enforcement other than us issuing a letter that says that they must. And we ask for photos, but we don't have a strong follow-up. So this would provide that. The alternative we heard, and actually this was the original proposal, which was modified by input, is to charge just a flat fee for each tree removal event, regardless of tree size or count. We heard that the Planning Commission and City Council supported charging based on the tree size. And so that's why we have this table that goes up by diameter.
A quick question on that. I agree with charging a fee based on the size, but how did you come up with those numbers? Did you get them from another city's ordinance?
They're not directly copied from any ordinance. We did look at fees charged by other cities. These do not match any one city exactly. We tried to find numbers that didn't make it so punitive that someone that truly didn't realize and was in ignorance of our ordinance was not crushed by a huge debt, but also, and as with these numbers that now reflect the tree sizes, we tried to think about, when you see a sapling, maybe you just don't know that it's protected because it's an oak. But if you see a tree that is 4 feet across, it seems more obvious that there might be protections. And so we wanted the numbers to kind of reflect common sense in thinking about things like that.
Thank you.
Typically, is it the homeowner who's pulling a tree permit, or is it the company they're hiring to cut down the tree?
I'd say it's majority the company, but pretty well split. We get calls from owners a lot, and obviously the company's hired by the owner, so it's always initiated with the homeowner.
And so ultimately, I'm just trying to think if there's a situation where a homeowner would think a permit was pulled because their tree cutter told them, and then they're responsible for the violation if it wasn't, but as the homeowner hiring the company, it's their responsibility. Yeah.
Correct. It would be an unfortunate situation, as it would fall to the homeowner.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, my concern is kind of just the opposite, because, as a planning commission, now we're getting into more of the tricky lots. And, what I wanted to avoid is having a situation like, for example, on Los Huertos, there's that new houses going in, grand old oak died. Before that oak died, it wasn't a buildable lot. In the situation where, seller and the buyer work out something, the seller cuts the tree down, then he turns around and sells it, and we have no recourse when that wouldn't have been a buildable lot if that tree was still there. Is there anything we could do about that? Not necessarily the penalty size, but from a planning commission size.
It's a tricky situation. Technically, we would want to take action against the person that perpetrated the crime, which is removing the tree illegally, which would be the previous owner. So it might be difficult to have those fines paid if they sold and moved away. I don't know that we would want to spend too much time tracking them down and things like that. On the other hand, if the new owner was not part of the tree's death, then I don't think it would be fair to apply the fines to them.
Because, I'm not talking about 2-foot diameter. I'm talking there's, in the town, we've got some really nice heritage oaks, and there's no way you could build around them. Okay, thank you.
This does speak to what we talked about earlier about wanting an arborist to confirm, when a dead tree is coming out, that the tree died of natural causes. You know, people have been known to overwater trees, damage them, back trucks into them. I mean, all sorts of things happen, not all of them on accident. And we want to make sure that if we're giving someone permission to remove a dead tree, it's because the tree aged out, not because something amiss happened.
Now, does the city have a list of approved arborists? Because, with oaks, it's really hard to tell if they're dying or not, and I didn't want just,
We do not have an approved list. However, any development application, a Category 2 tree permit, that has any kind of landscape plan, would go through our city landscape consultant. And so they would at least review the plans and the arborist letter. And we often get very detailed responses from our city landscape consultant.
thank you.
And just for the record, the city's landscape consultant is an arborist holding a arborist license.
One of the reasons I asked our next door neighbor, this was about 8 years ago, I live on the lower half of Los Trompas. We had an 11-foot diameter oak fell across and blocked the street. And we were next door, we felt our house shake about it. So somebody didn't know that that tree looked healthy.
Right. Okay, our last item, and this is new to this meeting, are just additional issues that we've proposed, mostly kind of housekeeping. These are not things that were discussed at the August meeting. We don't have any feedback, so there's no alternatives listed here. But the proposal here is that the purpose statement be updated. This would omit some of the background material that's currently there, focus on the goals of the ordinance, and include a wildfire goal. Definitions have been updated to remove any policies and regulations from the actual definitions. We've updated the definition of developed and undeveloped property and also some terminology. We've updated the measurement of trees with multiple trunks. Hopefully this is clearer now. We used to use this when calculating replacement tree numbers with a 1-to-1 ratio. This would fall by the wayside. The measurement of multiple trunk trees would apply only for penalties if illegally removed. And procedural improvements include a change to when we ask replacement trees to be planted. We would revise the planting schedule and require just Category 1, which are standalone tree permits, to be planted within 60 days or within the calendar year, whichever is longer, within the months of October to April, which is our rainy season. The goal here is to make sure trees are planted when they actually do best, which is the rainy season. This is something arborists have been asking us. They hate it when we require them to plant in June or July. Baby trees don't do so well then. So we're trying to hone our requirement. This will require a little bit of additional staff time to follow up on, but we think it's worth it. It means that a lot more trees will actually make it through that first year. We'll also make some internal procedural changes and add a monitoring system and include things like conditions of approval that speak to establishment irrigation for the first 2 years, things like that. Those conclude the changes. I now want to talk about public comment. We did not receive any comment in time to be included in the staff report. However, as you know, we did receive a public comment that came in yesterday and was published on the website this afternoon as a separate link. I want to go through a few items that I felt deserved some additional information. We did already talk about cork oak, so that was my first item. There was a comment about canopy coverage calculation. The numbers we talked about, 75%, 90%, how would we calculate that? We do have a software tool. I think it's iCanopy tool. I'm always saying it wrong. When you look up iCanopy, you get a pop-up tent. It's, I think, iTool Canopy. It was recommended to us by one of the Cal Extension experts. We used it. It requires a little bit of clicking, but it does provide a good estimate of what the canopy coverage is. So it would not be a discretionary squint and eyeball it kind of thing on the planner's part. We would use a software tool that is known for this. For the penalty fees that we just looked at, the table we were talking about for illegal removal, There is a suggestion to, instead of including that directly in the ordinance, instead include it in our fee schedule, which is adopted by the city council. This way, if we wanted to adopt, or excuse me, to change the fees, we would not have to make a code change or an ordinance change. It would simply be through the fee schedule. I think this is a good suggestion, and I believe we're planning to do that. And finally, there was one language change that I thought was very smart, a good catch, for protected trees on undeveloped properties, which is code section 6-1704B2. The current code is listed here on undeveloped property, a tree that is located on an undeveloped property and that is, and this is describing what's protected, of a native or native riparian species and that has a diameter of 6 inches or more, or of any other species and that has a diameter of 12 inches or more. The other is the suggested change here. It's not currently in the draft ordinance, but I think it makes it much clearer that we are not including native and riparian species in the 12-inch or more protection. That's a great suggestion that I'd be happy to carry forward. Looking at environmental review for this ordinance, we are relying on the 2023 Housing Element EIR. This was adopted in January 2023. An addendum to this EIR for the safety element was adopted in August 2023. The addendum found the safety element to be consistent with the housing element with impacts within the scope of the EIR. Staff evaluated both of these documents and determined that there were no substantial changes to the housing element or safety element and/or circumstances that would result in new significant impacts or a substantial increase in severity of significant impacts already identified. The proposed draft TPO implements the safety element, which was previously analyzed pursuant to the addendum to the housing element certified environmental impact report, and the state clearinghouse number is provided here. With this, no further environmental review is required for this ordinance update. With that, I'd like to offer the staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission adopt PC Resolution 2024-10, recommending the City Council adopt the subject tree protection ordinance update, which is MCR 0124.
Thank you, staff. I think we've already asked, but are there any other clarifying questions for staff? Mason?
In all this, Teresa, how do you deal with nesting birds?
Nesting birds are typically something that is considered by CEQA. It's not something we consider under the tree ordinance. So if someone comes in for a specific tree removal, we do not do a CEQA analysis of the tree removal. If the project is a development project, which would trigger CEQA on its own, then that would be included and the tree removal would be included in the CEQA analysis.
So in other words, that's why I said, I just specifically want to know I'm going to cut down a tree because branch I don't have to worry about nesting birds or endangered birds. I have a friend who's a birder. Told me, you do not, don't look at me. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't cut you off, did I, with this part?
You're fine. I just wanted to provide this so you understood the options before you. If you do feel able to adopt the resolution and approve the ordinance, then the ordinance would be forwarded to the City Council for their review and approval. If, however, you feel that there are additional changes you want to consider, you can continue this item to your next meeting, and we will return with those changes. We do have some meetings tentatively scheduled for City Council, which include November 12th and 25th, and December 9th as needed. Your next meeting is November 4th, so this would not alter that tentative schedule.
Mr. Heising?
Yeah, just a quick question on that. If the changes are minor enough, could we roll that into the motion and approve tonight?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
All right. Any other clarifying?
And the motion or the resolution currently does not include the comment letter recommendations that you shared on your last slide, correct? So we would need to roll that into our motion as well?
The only actual, change from this slide is the word other.
Yeah.
The other, so we would have to take the fee schedule, that box would come out, but no other changes are proposed on this slide.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, and since We don't have an applicant per se. Do we have any, I guess we will now open for public comments on it. Do we have anyone waiting for public? Oh, we have someone in the room too. Sorry, didn't see you.
I have no speaker slips, but Mr. McLean is bringing it up. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Crowd tonight. I'm Bob McLean. I'm the guy that wrote the email. I've built homes here in Lafayette, so I've gone through the tree permit process a while, which is partially why I'm interested and partially because I've seen the tree permit ordinance not consistently applied to applicants. You know, in the example I gave where it was $13,000 to tear out a bunch of smaller trees, that was a lot of money. But I've also seen a former staff member go, oh, hey, you're removing 4 trees, just plant 4 trees. And I'm just like, wait, no, that's $5,000 of mitigation, not 4 trees. And so that's part of why I have an interest in this. You've seen my letter. Oh, real quick comment. I've seen what you said happen, where developer was going to buy a property. There was a heritage oak. He got the seller to cut it down, bought the property. The city found out about it. And he's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. So he comes in like the golden knight to save the day, but now he's got a bigger thing to build. So it happens. The 1-to-1 ratio, I think, is a great idea. 95% of the errors I see on tree permits are on the tree permit calculation, by both the applicants and staff. Cut down 4 trees, put in 4 trees, it's real easy. But my comment there was, and as someone who pays for tree permits, I love it. But you're cutting down a lot of tree mitigation, you're cutting back a lot of money. I don't know how the city's coffers are with the mitigation fund and what they use it for, but just be aware that it's going to be a significant hit financially to the city and a significant hit on the number of trees. Canopy cover, I'm glad to hear that it's not something that staff is going to be doing the math on rather than applicant or having to go out and get a survey. At the same time, I did hear staff say it's a little complex. Adding complexity doesn't sound like a good idea. I also am concerned, I gave kind of a silly example in the letter that it's going to, you got a situation where, okay, you got to put in an oak tree, but I've got a pool and lawn and it's going to the west and the oak tree is going to grow and it's going to destroy the entire use of my yard. I'd rather let me put in a couple trees that are, 30 feet tall max. Well, sorry, your canopy cover isn't enough, so you got to do it. That's what it says. Taking away that flexibility, I don't like. I think staff's done a fine job with working with people. Here's what we can do. Some of the changes seem like fixing what ain't broke. One question I have is the cost of a tree permit going to change? I mean, it sounds like there's going to be more work for staff. Does that result in a higher tree permit cost? I guess that's kind of it. You got my letter and I just hit the high points. And, thank you.
I have a question. First of all, I appreciate the letter.
Sure.
You clearly have some knowledge on this, and I told staff beforehand, I'm not a tree expert by any stretch, so it's good to get this kind of feedback. I guess what I would ask is if you took your letter and you said, what are the top 2 most important things? Because I don't know if you necessarily wrote it that way. Maybe it is.
No,
I'd be curious,
I just
like, what are
want
the
topics,
Well, what would you say are the most important thing? I'm saying this kind of because I want to focus on what you're saying a
Right,
little,
yeah,
but I don't think we're going to take everything here.
No, the mitigation calculation is, I think, the number one thing. It simplifies it. I've written, I don't know, a dozen or more letters to the city about tree permits where there's errors, and almost every single one of them is related to the current calculation method that's not done right. So switching over to the 1-1 just makes it easier. It's going to make it more transparent. It's going to make it more equitable. It's going to give me more free time. So that's far and away the number one thing, that calculation. And I'm going to say too is the canopy cover, because it sounds like it's going to be in the desire for more, objectivity, and here's the math, and so you know what you're going to get. It sounds like you're losing some flexibility, and I don't know if it's worth it.
Okay. Commissioner Mason?
Yeah, well, since you're talking about flexibility, let me ask, I wanted to get your opinion. I know enough just to get myself in trouble.
Sure.
We've had this come before us. There's a lot in areas where you have, especially with oaks, a whole grouping of small oaks, 4, 6, 8 inches, where the recommendation comes in, for them to be healthy, you need to thin them out.
Right.
So they can grow that. So what is your feeling on that relative to everything we're doing here? Because it seems, with the canopy coverage and everything else, that it's kind of getting lost. And I didn't want people to be penalized for doing the right thing.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that, like, if you get an arborist who comes in and says, this tree is dead, or, you've got this clump of 5 trees, and if you take out these 2, the remaining 3 are going to be much healthier and much better over the long time. That if you have, like, the arborist letter saying this is better, this is healthy, this is safer, then, maybe you need a permit, but you shouldn't need mitigation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Radnich?
Thank you for providing your letter. It was, it was helpful. You did reference so that you've provided multiple comment letters to the city.
Yeah.
So I don't recall hearing your comments during the April nor the August hearing, so.
August, I think I was out of town. April, I don't have an answer for.
So there were letters that were outside of this
Right, so-
topic,
so-
this item.
Right, so, staff probably knows me as that crazy tree permit guy. When stuff gets posted, usually for a DRC meeting, but sometimes here, actually usually DRC, a tree permit will be part of the application. And so, I just will check online and see, it's like, oh, blah, this doesn't look right, I have questions here. And so my letters generally go to staff and DRC. I think I've done maybe one to the planning commission, but it's generally staff and DRC and sometimes CC, city council. But yeah, this body has escaped most of my writing.
Was this the first time you heard of the tree ordinance update?
No, there was something earlier this year. There was an online survey that you could do, and I did that. I don't know what else
If I may, I believe you, Mr. McLean, I believe you did actually submit a comment letter before the April meeting.
Did I?
When
Okay,
we were
thank you.
first
Thanks for
discussing
backing me
it
up.
and opening it.
Okay,
Thanks for
thank
backing me
you.
up there.
Thanks.
So,
Great. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. Do appreciate
Okay,
the letter.
thanks.
Thank you.
good night.
All right. Do we have any other public comments online or elsewhere?
If you would like to speak on this item, go ahead and hit the raise hand function on your Zoom window. Seeing none.
Okay. We will close this item for public comments and bring it back to the planning commission to discuss. We don't have any applicant, so I don't think yeah. Anyone have any comments, questions? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, I think we can, I've got a couple, I made reference to an earlier thing I'd like clarified regarding, well, let me just back up and say, I think we can make some tweaks tonight and get this thing approved without asking staff to bring it back. So having said that, why don't we, I'm going to propose a couple things that I think are minor tweaks. So in section 3, second bullet, if we can just clarify that replacement trees to be planted on any public street or right-of-way if the planting is not, at the same location is not possible, just with the caveat or the requirement or the desire to make it as close as possible to that location. You're not going to go take that tree and put it on another street all across town just because it's in the public right-of-way. And then, same with bullet 3, it talks about allowing mitigation planting in other portions of the right-of-way. I would say we would add that clarifier as well to the third bullet. And then on number 2, the proposal is to name which trees are protected on development plans, and I'm assuming they're also identified on the plans themselves, like, okay, I
That's correct.
didn't want to assume, but okay.
We typically require an arborist report
called
for
out.
any plan that is affecting trees.
It's called
They would
out
be
in-
numbered, listed, et cetera.
The CAD operators drafted it out that shows that.
And if for some reason there's not clear numbering or ability to identify the tree, we can copy and paste a screenshot of the section of plan and large enough and put it right there in the conditions. So we will make sure it's clear what we're talking about.
Okay. And then number 4, replacement trees. I'm all for the 1-to-1. I agree, it makes it easier. However, in the old way, if there was, based on the breast diameter height, or what it's called now, it's not breast, it's what? Standard development height? Yeah, sorry, I'm old school. Based on that diameter of the tree at that height, it may have triggered planting of 2 15-gallon trees, for example. So in my day job, I'm used to regulatory agencies having mitigation ratios in which you mitigate more than what you took away, for example, with wetlands mitigation or something. In this case, with a tree, if you planted 2 trees and 1 died, well, at least you got 1 that was growing. With a 1-to-1, you don't have, the idea of survivability comes up. So if it's 1-to-1 and it dies, what, is there any follow-up to make sure there was a survival? Is there a plant establishment period?
There's not specific requirements for staff to do follow-up. If typically, trees are planted towards the end of a construction period, and that's even if it's a development process. So if it's just a standalone tree permit, they're simply planted. Go ahead.
And as a routine matter, we do not schedule a reinspection 1 year, 2 years out from the initial planting. But it is common, if it is a matter of concern for a neighbor, for the city to get notified if that tree fails to thrive, if it dies for lack of water or other neglect or just nature. Or subsequently down the road, if that was part of a development approval and the new owner doesn't even know that that is a protected tree and they remove it, we become aware through the eyes and ears of the community. So we don't have a standard practice of staff following up at a future point in time, but it is common to become aware.
So in the earlier conversation, we talked about planting during certain months from October to February. Could that be put into this section to help with the survivability? Because we were talking about that in relative to another section, weren't we?
We were, and I'd have to look at what the section is where it would go. But you mean just moving that language to a different section of the
That-
ordinance?
Just so that when the replacement tree is planted or the mitigated tree that is done at the appropriate time of year that it's likely to survive, not July when it's 105 degrees and the thing's going to get cooked in 3 weeks. I don't know how that works with, I should be talking to my fellow commissioners, but I don't know how that works with the timing of when that replacement tree is supposed to be planted.
While she's looking that up, can I, because one of the things I was wanting to discuss kind of ties in with that, because you're talking about the survivability. The one-to-one is maybe going to bleed off over time. I did like Mr. McLean's, in the one-to-one section, he also had a little, hey, for heritage types, and I actually like this idea, so I want to read it and then see if you guys have any thoughts on it. For heritage type trees, maybe consider an extra 4 trees of mitigation for each tree removed that is more than 24-inch diameter. Again, easy math. And his point earlier was a one-to-one was very easy. I know this came up on our study sessions a little, but I think for the simplicity reason, we just kept going back to one-to-one. But I don't think that would be overly burdensome. And again, we could change the number of trees or the diameter that triggers it. But to me, it seems like it has the replacement more weighted for the bigger, more important trees. So do you guys have that thought at all? Because I could support adding that in beyond the one-to-one.
Well, it seems to be going in the opposite direction of the one-to-one. I mean, I heard that when there's calculations, I heard a comment that when there's calculations, people mess up the calculations. So if it's one-to-one, it's
Right.
pretty simple. Are we then, if we do this, are we then introducing room for error?
Well, I mean, it's a good point, but I think the calculation ones were when, are we cumulative, diameter? I think this could be pretty simply stated. It's 1 for 1. However, if any one of those one is a heritage over 24 inches, let's say we assume those metrics, then that particular one would be 4 for 1 or 3 for 1 or whatever we would say. So I don't think I would love to hear staff's thoughts on that does that blow the simplicity away? Or is there a reasonable place that something like that could not be overly burdensome to your average person to figure out?
I don't think it would be overly burdensome to implement. You're sticking to a ratio of tree number to tree number versus looking at number of inches of the diameter divided by, multiplied by 2, whatever we have right now. It's quite complex. And so if you wanted to just pick a simple trigger, at which point a larger number of replacement trees were required, that would be fairly straightforward. We require that any arborist report list the exact diameter of every tree being removed, so it would be quite clear.
So can you read that again?
So for heritage, yeah, I'll read. For heritage type trees, consider, I'm modifying it, he says, maybe consider an extra 4 trees of mitigation for each tree removed that is more than 24 inches in diameter.
So that's a 5-to-1 ratio for trees that are 24 inches in diameter, right? Because it says an additional
Not,
4.
I think what he was saying was 4, and we could make that clear. So it's 1-to-1 for every tree. If any particular tree,
It's a 4-to-1 ratio.
it's 1-to-1 outside of this for every tree that's being mitigated. But if any of those trees are heritage and over, let's just say 24 inches, then that particular one would require 4-to-1.
Was
Again,
this
we can change those to be whatever we think.
Was this brought up by the council or in the joint?
It was not discussed at the previous meeting. Mr. Enduri, who's a large fan of tree preservation, was the one that suggested this alternative. It's on the screen now. He was saying, why don't we stick to the current ratio we have and simply allow flexibility in either replacement or in lieu fees beyond the 1-to-1 that must be planted. So he was advocating for additional plantings. Generally speaking, everyone else supported the 1-to-1 ratio. As you asked, it would not be difficult to implement a step up. I would suggest a slightly larger diameter. Lafayette is full of large trees. I would suggest perhaps 30 inches. But having 3 planted, 4 planted at that level, there's no difficulty in implementing that.
Yeah, and I'm not married to those, so I would easily, just for the sake of discussion, 30-inch, 3-to-1, but again, I'm not married to anything. I just think it puts a little more onus on bigger trees of heritage caliber that are being removed, having more value and therefore more replacement. But if you guys don't want to,
No,
I'm good.
well, first of all, I agree. Well, for the opposite reason, I think these are the trees we should be protecting. And to make it more onerous and more expensive, hopefully people will stop and think before they do it, especially, when you look at the price of land and, hey, these $1 million lots, hey, what's, an extra $20,000 or $30,000 to get the house I want on the site I want, and all I have to do is cut down a tree and it's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think we're going to be in trouble if we're trying to stop that, though, because the value is so great for the house versus the cost of the tree, till we put like unreal numbers, but I do agree with you. But anyways, so you sound like you have some support for it.
Yeah, I
I
definitely.
know you shook your head no. I mean, just.
Well, I was just going to
feel.
say, I'm not opposed to considering some of the public comments that were received at the 11th hour. I did specifically ask the question if the commenter who's already left the room, if he has provided these comments and why maybe he didn't attend the April or August meeting when these could have it could have been easier to include. I'm not opposed to discussing them, but I do think a lot of time and energy has gone in by professionals and by the Planning Commission and by the City Council. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to leave it how it is, 1-to-1, and then make our recommendation to the council. This is in the public record, Bob's made his comment, and they could consider it when they have this item before them. And if he wants to come and make a comment again, especially hearing that the 1-to-1 was a recommendation by one of our council members, and that this item came out of that joint council planning commission think tank, I'm more inclined to just leave it how it is.
Yeah, okay. So just 2 things, and then we move on, and I'm fine with that. I don't believe until this packet was submitted, there was an actual ordinance for anyone to read, right? Is that so?
That's
So
correct.
some of it might be the fact that there wasn't a real ordinance, and that was how it was designed. We went through study sessions and came up with ideas. So it would have been nice, maybe he waited. I don't know. He's not here. But I don't want that to negate maybe a good idea, so. And then Commissioner Heising, to your point, I do remember when we were here discussing it, it was one of those where I personally was like, I don't love that, but I'm also, I'm not a tree guru, so I wasn't, so I guess what I'm saying is, and I think as staff mentioned, Councilmember Enduri, did kind of, so there is some support for that idea, I think, on the council, but I just never felt like, it was one of those, it was a little nebulous to kind of get to like, what's a number that we can all agree on? So I think the idea just kind of, the format was like, yes, go forward with how it is. And so I would love it maybe as a compromise if we could, to your point, if we could let council know that this was one we talked about, and I don't think there was a definitive no way. It just was like, hey, we're trying to move forward. So if that's something that they're still debating, I think there was some sympathy that might be a nice exception for bigger heritage, whether it's 30-inch or much. So if that could be passed to them, I'm good with that. We can move on.
Absolutely, we can call that out. I did want to clarify, I didn't mean to misstate, this was not a number that came from council. Staff originally proposed it under the alternatives discussion, and other than Mr. Undry's suggested alternative listed here, there was no other alternative or demur from the 1-to-1 ratio at the past meeting. That's all I meant to say.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
I would like to, sorry, if I may, one moment, I want to return to your comment about the location of the timing code. It's currently listed in the clean version of the ordinance on page 3-15 under 1708 tree replacement mitigation D timing. That's where we've placed that language. So it's part of the code describing tree replacement and mitigation, timing of when trees would be replaced and
So following the timing will help survivability, but there's no requirement of survivability. There's no plan establishment period.
That's correct.
But Greg, you mentioned that usually neighbors will call and say, hey, this tree that this person was supposed to plant died. And then what? So say that happens. Is there follow-up for that? Does that tree get replaced, or do we need to protect these newly planted trees somehow in the ordinance?
If I may, all replacement trees are automatically protected. So they are deemed a protected tree once they are planted as a replacement tree. So once we know that a replacement tree has died due to neglect, then that would be something that the applicant would need to either replace again and keep alive, or pay one of the fines for not keeping alive.
Okay.
And that would be the same as simply not planting. If
So
we
it's a
learned-
roundabout way of making sure that it survives without having a plan establishment period and requiring staff to have to go back out and follow up and spend hours and money to do that.
And neighbors are excellent at letting us know.
Understood and
Please do
agreed.
not go in.
Okay.
Lives
All
of-
right, thanks. I'm satisfied on that.
All right, so, Commissioner Heising? I'm sorry, Mason, excuse me.
Well, other one. This isn't a change, too complex, I didn't want to put it here, but I just wanted to toss this out because I've had a couple clients that would do this. The only place in Lafayette I can see this is that hillside opposite Oakwood, which is large. So what I had some clients would do is they'd look at that, a piece of property like that, and say, it's 15 years, 20 years before we even have a plan. So what we want to do is we want to go in and plant the trees now. 15 years from now, because we don't know what's going to go in there, 15 years from now, they'll be mature. We'll cut down the ones that we don't want because they interfere with the housing going, and then we have mature trees that shade it from the street and stuff like that. Is there something that built in to give like the planning director a little discretion, or is, just doing that basically, if you planted all sorts of oaks all throughout, is that, just handicapping them?
A handicap. They would need to comply with the ordinance as it's written. If they were worried about wanting to get a tree permit in the future and what its cost or replacement, et cetera, might be, they would be welcome to plant non-native species that are not protected. If it's an undeveloped property, those would still be protected at 12 inches, but they would have a little more time. But any property application, development application that comes in with a proposal to remove trees is going to come under the ordinance the same, whether they were planted by the owner 20 years ago or someone else.
Thank you.
Could an applicant not do a development agreement with the city to kind of force, okay, so that's what they should do.
Yeah, because what they did is they just took acorns. They plant them all around, and in 15 years, you've got legitimate trees.
Well, if they do a development agreement, then they'll make the plan that could be done in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I think I'm assuming we got all the changes in. Are we good with all the changes that were proposed?
Apologies. I have 3 changes from Commissioner Heising relating to numbers 2, 3, and 4, the naming and IDs of specific trees, on the conditions, the city and privately maintained trees being planted as close as possible to the original location, and the one-to-one ratio, it seems like you did not actually have a final change. You were satisfied with our follow-up. So 2 changes there. And then making sure that the city council understands support for a possible step up in replacement ratio at a certain higher diameter. I have my changes that were proposed from the public comment, including a single word for clarity and removing the fee schedule from the ordinance. Those are the changes I have from you.
Through the chair, just as a point of clarification, that support for the larger diameter, I'd like, Arlie, your suggestion that it be 30 inches and higher, just so the cutoff there versus 24.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. Okay, great. Well then, I think we're ready to move forward. So if I can get a motion, we can move forward,
I'll make a motion.
please.
I move that we adopt PC Resolution 2024-10, recommending the City Council adopt the subject tree ordinance update MCR 01-24 with the additions that we just spoke about through Chair Heising and through staff's suggested revisions.
We get a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. Does that still get a 14-day appeal period? Yeah, okay. Well, motion carries. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. All right, thank you on that one. I guess now we'll move on to our second new public hearing. So, and thank you, Arlie, on that one, first one.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Madison Leonard, and tonight I will be presenting Land Use Permit Application LO6-24 at 960 Moraga Road to allow a new daycare and educational services use, specifically a mathnasium tutoring center. As shown on the screen, the project site, distinguished by the red star on the map above, is located in Lafayette's downtown. The general plan designation is Downtown Core, and the site is located within the Downtown Specific Plans Plaza District, as outlined by the yellow layer on the map above. Additionally, the property is in the Retail Business, or RB, zoning district. This land use designation prioritizes commercial vitality and encourages a variety of businesses. Mathnasium of Lafayette is currently located at 3435 Mount Diablo Boulevard, at the eastern edge of the Plaza District, and is proposing to relocate to 960 Moraga Road, Suite B, which is one of 4 tenant spaces within the building. Mathnasium operates as an after-school tutoring center for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Current hours of operation at the 3435 Mount Diablo Boulevard location are 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays. These hours of operation are proposed to remain the same in the new location. The current mathnasium has a maximum of 10 students on site at one time. At the new location, given expected future business growth, the business predicts a maximum of 20 students on site at one time. However, these numbers fluctuate based on the time of day. At the current location, Mathnasium typically has 10 students on site at peak hours, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., and 5 students on site during slower evening hours, between 5 and 7 p.m. Mathnasium proposes to initially have 4 tutors on site and expects to hire more tutors as needed. Additionally, Mathnasium will maintain a center director to operate the business 1 hour prior
for potential leads, questions from existing customers, and prep work. Tutoring sessions are typically 1 hour in duration and occur at the top of the hour. However, the Mathnasium will implement 15-minute time slots to phase out commencement, which will also reduce the number of cars entering the parking lot at one given time. The number of sessions offered per day will vary based on student demand and schedules. Staff does not foresee any issues with the proposed land use, business type, or operating characteristics based on the new use providing services to students in the community, similar and complementary operating characteristics to neighboring businesses, and minimal impacts. On the screen above, you will see the proposed site outlined in green, as well as nearby surrounding uses. Existing tenants in the building on site include Reeve Bistro, Swad Indian Cuisine, and Pandora Nail Spa. The area surrounding the project is developed with a mixture of uses, including multifamily residential, restaurants, religious institution, retail, commercial office, and personal services. Additionally, Lafayette Elementary School is located approximately 400 feet south of the project site. The business anticipates that students will walk to the site for tutoring sessions after school hours. Staff finds the project is consistent with the downtown specific plan as a tutoring center contributes to the mix of uses the Plaza District envisions and offers a service for the community. The proposed land use would occupy space within the existing building at 960 Moraga Road and would not affect building height, open space, or setbacks. No physical changes are proposed as part of this permit. However, if this request for a land use permit is approved, the applicant will perform interior tenant improvements, which will require zoning plan check approval prior to obtaining a building permit with Contra Costa County. Additionally, any proposed signage on the exterior of the building will be required to comply with the sign ordinance of Lafayette's municipal code and shall adhere to permitting requirements. Staff sent the land use proposal to outside referral agencies for comments. The city's Transportation and Circulation Program Manager provided comments regarding potential circulation impacts. However, the project includes conditions of approval, such as a tutoring session phasing plan to space out drop-offs and pickups, short-term parking spaces, and informing customers of alternative public parking locations. The city's Transportation and Circulation Program Manager found the conditions satisfactory in addressing potential circulation concerns. Lastly, Republic Services, the Fire District, and the Building Department provided standard comments. The applicant provided a letter of support for the project from Windsor Management, a neighboring business located at 935 Moraga Road. Staff did not receive any other public comments on this land use proposal. Staff found the project to be categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15301, existing facilities. Based on staff's analysis in the resolution that finds the project conforms with the required findings for a land use permit, along with support from referral agencies, staff recommends the Planning Commission find the project exempt from CEQA and adopt PC Resolution 2024-11, approving the project subject to conditions of approval. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any clarifying? Commissioner Heising?
I just have one question. Why is it called a daycare and educational service? Why isn't it just educational service use?
That is how the land use is described in our
In the code?
code.
Not for this application, okay. Because it was just confusing to me, like, why is it titled that? Because it's not a daycare, but, okay, thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Mason?
Well, it might be just similar, because we had that one that's similar to WeWork. If you're dropping a kindergartner off and the parents aren't necessarily staying there, that needs to be made clear to everybody else. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Would the applicant like to present? Thank you. Anything, anyone want to present for the applicant? I'm not sure. Okay, all right. Any questions for the applicant? All right. Do we have any public comments other than what we received in the packet?
We do not.
Okay. We will close this from public comments and bring it back to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Heising.
I think this is a great use for this location. I think I think it's ideal that it's right across the street from the elementary school. So any circulation concerns, if a student can get out of school and walk across the street to the mathnasium, and then the parents are coming to pick up the student, they can just as easily walk back across the street and get picked up over at the school parking lot. And if there's a parent sitting in the parking lot waiting for a kid to come out, and someone from a restaurant or from the nail salon needs to back out, well, that parent's just gonna have to go out the driveway, circle around, and come back in. So I don't see a problem with circulation. Also, it's better than having another restaurant there, because a restaurant patron or a nail patron will come park and use that parking spot. So there should be more parking spots for a parent to swing in and pick up a kid. So I think it's a great location. I'm happy to make a motion.
Commissioner Mason.
Second Commissioner Heising's. I also wanted to give a compliment to your mission statement. Yeah, I think that there's, I want to, second Commissioner Heisinger, I also want to compliment you on your mission statement. I think that math education is lacking. I still remember my son. My wife is an attorney, a very intelligent individual, and the look on horror in his face when he goes, "Mom, you mean you didn't take calculus in high school?" He says, "Blake, I didn't take calculus in college." And it's like, my God, who raised me? You know, I'm an engineer, so I could help there, but I am glad that you're there. I wish you all the best, and I think it's a very good location, so you have my full support.
Vice Chair, anything? I like the use. I have a couple of concerns, but they're not going to stop me from supporting this. I hope people figure out how to park like you described. I hope parents, I would love that. I almost think of the school parking lot as airport cell phone lot. Like if people know how to do it, it works really well. I do worry about the Rev and the other tenants there, but they'll work it out. The one thing, and if you guys have an answer, but if you don't feel the need, you don't need to answer it. It mentioned in here 2 10-minute spaces, which I think are great. Most of the time, I just wanted to make sure that the other leases allow that or they don't have a say in it. I'm going to assume that, meaning that the other leases have no ability to say that can't happen. In my day job, when one group gets more parking, the other groups usually have to say okay or not. And I didn't see that written in here, so I'm assuming, what?
But wasn't there a letter of support from the property owner?
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean the other people who lease space there are being represented, you know, but that's not really something we have to get into. And if they had an issue, they could have come here. I just wanted to say that was something that caught my eye. But again, I think it'll work out. So my assumption is the other people, like Rev, I'm going to use an example. If their lease said that they get fair use of all the parking spaces, a landlord couldn't technically give one tenant other stuff. It's not for us
It's
to.
probably shared parking for.
Yeah, so shared parking, you typically can't do that. But again, I'm not going to second guess this because they could have
Which
spoken
page
up.
are you on? Can you point exactly where you're on?
Yeah, so staff report, page 5 of 6. Pending land, part 3, pending land use permit approval, the landlord of the property has indicated the desire to dedicate 2 10-minute parking spaces. So basically, 2 of the parking spaces would be kind of called, you know, like mathnasium short-term parking. That's perfectly fine. Just usually in a center like that, the other tenants would have some say in that. Maybe the landlord's already worked it out with them. If that were the case, I would have loved to have seen it here just mentioned, but it's not going to stop me because,
But it doesn't say in there that it's the 10-minute parking just for Mathnasium. It could be Sawad, takeout from Sawad also.
it's not how I read it. Pending land use approval, the landlord of the property has indicated the desire to dedicate, I mean, it's very loosely written, so maybe it's not tying us to anything. The desire to dedicate to, so maybe what it's saying is the landlord will try to negotiate with the other tenants. That's fine. Again, I don't want to stop us because I think people will figure it out.
And
So that's,
it's my understanding that according to the lease agreement that's going to be signed between Mathnasium and the owner, the landlord, those 2 10-minute parking spaces are part of their lease agreement. I'm not sure if they will specifically say it's dedicated to Mathnasium. It's my impression that it will just be 2 10-minute parking spaces. But the applicant is here, and if you'd like confirmation, I can direct.
would either of you like to address it? I'd just like to know, and it's not going to change my thoughts. Yeah, please, and just tell us who you are. We appreciate you coming out.
Hi, I'm Abhimanyu Dhariwal. I'm the applicant, and myself and my wife are the owners of the Mathnasium Center. And 2 points of clarification. One is that we already have a signed lease agreement, which explicitly states that there are going to be 2 10-minute spots. There won't be anything saying that it's Mathnasium specific, but there are going to be 2 10-minute spots in the parking lot. There are already 2 spots there that are marked 15 minutes, and we had basically negotiated that, bring it down to 10 minutes. So once this permit is approved, it will be changed to 10 minutes and made very loud and clear that it's a 10-minute parking spot.
Okay, so that tells me, that makes sense. That means they're already existing. They're just going to be shorter so that it really turns over quicker. Okay, that answers mine. Since you're up, I want to ask you another one, just out of curiosity. So you guys are in Lafayette right now. Do you mind sharing, if you're comfortable, why you guys are moving? Is it a better location? Just more from the retail aspect, I'm curious.
Sure. Multiple reasons. One is the existing one, the previous owner had started in 2011, and it's not compliant with Mathnasium's own guidelines of how a Mathnasium center should look and feel, because it's supposed to be welcoming and inviting parents, and parents should know that such a service exists. Current location, there's no visibility. Only if you looked up on Google Maps, you might know it's there in that building. And plus, it makes a lot of sense for us to be closer to schools. We run 3 other Mathnasium centers, and we have always tried to keep it next to schools because it really helps parents, helps a lot of students, and we also know students from Stanley come walking, and it's the new location will be even closer for them. So it would be the benefit for everyone.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all I have.
Okay, I didn't officially make the motion, so I will now.
Okay.
I find the project exempt from CEQA and recommend that we adopt Planning Commission Resolution 2024-11, approving the project with conditions of approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. So does this go to city council? No? Okay, so now there's a 14-day appeal period. All right, thank you. That's approved.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, staff, for that one. Other business? Anything, Greg or otherwise? Commissioners report? Planning directors report?
Good evening. 2 items. One is the city manager at Tuesday's council meeting reported out that the city has been notified by Lennar, who is constructing the Brandt at Mount Diablo and Dolores Mountain View. The good news is that the signal just west of that intersection is active. So now that is a safer place to make turning movements, pedestrian crossings, et cetera. It has, the not great news is that the builder has notified the city that all of the windows will need to be replaced because they are not functioning as designed and intended. And so they need to be replaced for long term. And so that'll take approximately 6 months to do that work. The city met with the developer and builder to reinforce our desire to have the public improvements done as quickly as possible, and they are attempting to wrap those up before the winter rains. So that is the Brandt. And then last Monday night, the city council reported that they had interviewed 3 candidates for the vacancies on the planning commission. They did appoint 2 new commissioners, and so we anticipate that they will join you for your first meeting in November.
Great. Unless there's anything else, I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.